Hi, Sam and Clara. It's Mommy. I love you and miss you both so much. But I wanted to read you some stories so that when you're missing me or when you want me to read you a story, you can just turn this on and listen. I'm in my pajamas, maybe you are too, but I'm nice and comfy. And I'm going to read a few stories from the Bible. I'm going to start with the story that happened on Good Friday. You know this story. It's a sad one. The crucifixion. The Roman who had been appointed governor of Jerusalem was a man named Pontius Pilate. He did not have a great deal of interest in the religious traditions of the people he ruled. He listened wearily as the chief priests told him about their prisoner. "He's leading our people astray. He's telling people not to pay taxes. He's claiming to be the Messiah. That's our word for king." Pilate questioned Jesus himself. "He's no threat to me or to Rome," he thought to himself. "My choice would be to release him." The priests were dismayed at his decision. They argued their case back and forth till Pilate knew he had to put an end to all their nonsense. "All right," he said, "I'll have him whipped, and then let him go." He glanced outside. "Look," he added, "the crowds are gathering. It's time for me to release a prisoner as a Passover privilege. I'm sure they'll want Jesus. He has been popular, hasn't he? I'll go and ask right now." But the crowd outside had other ideas. Their hero was a well-known rebel, and they chanted his name. "Barabbas! Barabbas!" Pilate looked down in astonishment and lifted his hand for quiet. "What shall I do with Jesus?" he asked. "Crucify him! Crucify him!" they screamed. The anger of the crowd made Pilate nervous. He was afraid they might riot if he didn't give them what they wanted. "Well," he announced, "Barabbas goes free, Jesus gets the death sentence. I'll give my officers the order at once." Jesus was marched away. The soldiers loaded a great beam of wood onto his shoulders. "You carry your own cross," they laughed, "and you've got company. There are 2 more who have to make that short but memorable walk to Calvary Hill." When they reached the rocky hill just outside the city walls, they nailed Jesus to the wood of his cross and hung him up to die. The 2 criminals were nailed onto their crosses on either side. Jesus looked down as the soldiers began to share out his possessions. He looked at the respectable people who had plotted to have him put to death. He said a prayer. "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they are doing." For 3 hours Jesus hung on the cross. The noonday sun slid behind a shadow and the sky went dark. People came to stare at the executions. Some jeered, others wept. Among them, the women who had followed Jesus and who still believed in him. Then Jesus cried out, "Father, in your hands I place my spirit." And then he died. Not long after, a man named Joseph arrived with a little group of helpers. He had been given permission to take Jesus' body. He and his companions were going to give Jesus a decent burial. Not far away, a rock-cut tomb was ready. They loaded the body onto a funeral stretcher and carried it away. Some of the women who had followed Jesus from Galilee came too. The mourners did not have much time. The sun was sinking low in the sky. Its setting would mark the beginning of the Sabbath day of rest. Hurriedly, Jesus' body was wrapped and placed in the tomb. The women watched to see what was done before the stone door was rolled shut. "We'll come back after the Sabbath to wrap the body properly," they agreed, "and then we can use the traditional spices and perfumes as well." Then the sun touched the horizon line. The clouds were red for a few moments and then faded to gray. Nighttime was upon them all. And on Easter Sunday, oh, look at this here. This is a funeral. So death is a natural ending of life, and the people of the Bible accepted it as such. However, the body needed to be dealt with respectfully, and in a hot climate, speedily. Those left behind were expected to grieve. So here the body is carried on a stretcher to the place of burial. And look, there is wailing and mournful music. They're playing music and crying. The tomb is a cave in a rock. Its stone door can be rolled shut. Oh, and over here, an ossuary. Once the body had rotted, the bones were put in a special bone box. And down here, the body is washed and wrapped in strips of cloth. There's anointing oil, and mourners wear sackcloths and ashes. The body was taken to a cave cut in the rock. A tomb like this had space for several bodies and ossuaries. Now, Sam and Clara, on Easter morning, you might want to hear this next story. It was very early on Sunday morning. The sky was only just turning pale as the day dawned. The women who had believed so much in Jesus were already on the way to his tomb. They wanted to complete the funeral traditions in the very best way they could. It would be their way of saying a last goodbye. "It's going to be quite hard for us to move the stone door, isn't it?" said one. There were more helpers when it was rolled shut. "Do you think we'll manage?" "It was a very large stone," said another. "It's bound to be very heavy." "Isn't it strange what you imagine in this half-light?" said a third, whose name was Mary Magdalene. "It looks from here as if the stone door has been rolled away." As they came near, they all slowed to a stop and gazed at one another in amazement. "The stone really has been rolled away," said Mary. "Who can have done that?" Their eyes were full of fear. Who had moved the stone? And if the tomb was wide open, what might have happened to Jesus' body? Warily, they walked closer. Clutching one another, they bent to look inside the tomb. It was empty. The women stepped back. Their thoughts were racing. Who had been in the tomb before them? Was that person still close by? A slight noise made them whirl around. There were two men, no one they knew or even like anyone they knew, standing quietly. Their tunics were shining white. The women gasped in fear and bowed low. "Why are you looking in a tomb for someone who is alive?" said one of the men. "He isn't here. God has raised him to life." The women glanced at one another. Then they simply turned and ran. They ran all the way to where the disciples were still in hiding, only 11 now that Judas had disappeared. The women had hardly got indoors before they began to scream their news. "Jesus! His body's gone!" they cried. "There were people at the tomb, angels maybe, who said he was alive. You have to come and see." The disciples simply stared at them. "You're upset," said one sullenly, "but there's no need to talk nonsense." Only Peter decided to go and see for himself. He found the tomb empty, and the grave clothes that had been wrapped round Jesus. He didn't know what to think. Now, if you want, you can stop the story here, and tomorrow you can hear another one. Otherwise, you can keep listening. This chapter is called The Surprise Guest. The news about Jesus' empty tomb was not something that anyone dared to talk about openly. Even so, it spread like wildfire among the people who believed in Jesus. It found its way into every whispered conversation. Two of them were still talking about the strange news as they set off for home that evening. They lived in Emmaus, just a few hours' walk from Jerusalem. As they walked and talked, another person came along the same road. He was going the same way, and they began to make conversation. "I notice you're looking rather unhappy," said the stranger. "What were you talking about that makes you feel that way?" "Haven't you heard?" they replied. "We were talking about Jesus of Nazareth. He was a preacher, a prophet even, and he had many followers, including us. But the religious leaders didn't like him, and they had him crucified. His terrible, cruel death was bad enough, but now the news has taken a very strange twist. Some women went to his tomb, and they found it open and the body gone. They talked some nonsense about angels saying that Jesus was alive, but that sort of thing doesn't happen. This is the real world, after all." The stranger thought a moment before speaking. "It does make sense, really," he said. "Our holy books, Talk about the Messiah, after all, and they do say that he will have to suffer before his kingdom really comes into being. Explain more, the two insisted, and the stranger began to talk. He went on talking all the way to Emmaus, and they were eager to go on listening. Come and stay with us, they pleaded. It's getting dark. You'll need somewhere to stay the night. The man agreed. They all went into the house and prepared a simple meal. When they all sat down to eat, the man took the bread in his hands to say the blessing prayer. Then he broke it into pieces for all of them to share. As he did so, the two people recognized who it was. "It's you! It's Jesus!" they exclaimed. But all at once, he was gone. The two didn't even stop to finish their meal. They got up and almost ran the miles back to Jerusalem. They went straight to the place where the 11 disciples were staying. To their astonishment, the group was in an exuberant mood. "Jesus has risen from the dead," the disciples told them. "Simon has actually seen him." "Well, so have we," they replied, and they told their story about the walk home and the moment when Jesus broke the bread. While they were speaking, Jesus came and stood among them. His appearance was such a surprise they almost fainted. "Why start doubting now?" laughed Jesus. "I'm not a ghost. Look at my hands and feet. Show the marks of the nails. Touch me. You'll find out I'm flesh and blood. And more than that, I'm ready for something to eat. What have you got? Fish? That will be nice." As he ate, he began to explain what was going on. God's promises were coming true. The time had come to welcome everyone in the world to be part of God's kingdom and to live as one of God's people. I've got one more story here to read for you. This is called God's Own Spirit. Jesus' followers had no doubts left. They truly believed he had risen from the dead. However, his work on earth was done. It was time for him to return to heaven. He led his followers to a village outside Jerusalem. "The task I began is yours to continue," he told them. "Don't begin at once. You must wait until God fills you with the Holy Spirit. It will give you the strength and wisdom you need. Then you will spread the message that I taught. You will take it to every corner of the world." Then he said a blessing prayer. As he did so, he was taken up into heaven. A cloud hid him from their sight. They were still looking up when two men dressed in white came and stood next to them. "Why are you looking up at the sky?" they asked. "Jesus has gone to heaven. One day he will return." And Sam and Clara, that's where I'm going to end the story, but there's a whole lot more that you can read with Daddy, or I can read you some more when I come back home. I love you both so much. Here's my hug. Hug for Sam. Kiss for Sam. Mwah. And a tickle, tickle, tickle for Sam. And now for Clara. A hug for Clara. And a kiss for Clara. And a tickle, 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 tickle for Clara. I love you both so much, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.